It's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
Westbrook stops at the 1 and goes down to a knee.
Bitter labor dispute caused the cancellation of the playoffs.
You don't know when he's going to be back. Two really serious concussions.
Hello and welcome back to How To Fantasy Sports. In today's video, we're going to take a look back at week 3 of the fantasy football season. Week that had a lot of big plays, a lot of great fantasy performances, a few injuries, and another week of Chris Johnson slowly sucking the life out of his team owner's fantasy championship dreams. Get him to your bench immediately, or trade him for whatever you can find out there. Now, first up, we're going to take a look back at some of the big injuries that occurred over the past week, specifically one to Reggie Bush. Hopefully you took our advice in our previous video to sell high on Reggie Bush, as he has been known to be not the most durable running back out there, and so injuries are a part of being a Reggie Bush owner. So if you still have him, you got to find a replacement for him. Daniel Thomas and Lamar Miller are fairly good options for Reggie Bush, but neither will command as much as the offense as Reggie Bush does when he's in the starting lineup. So you're not going to get the same return by putting in either of those two replacements for him, as both forecast to get roughly about the same amount of carries or produce the same amount of fantasy points on any given week that Reggie Bush is out. And next up is CJ Spiller, a guy who probably didn't get that injured. Looks like it's not going to be a long-term injury. And plus, with the return of Fred Jackson coming either in week 4 or at worst looking like week 5, you don't have any real pressing need to add Tashard Choice into your lineup, or at least to invest heavily in the guy. At best, you're going to get one weekend out of him. Now, we do admit that any running back in that Buffalo offense is worth owning, but just don't give up a lot trying to pick him up. And next up is Arizona Cardinals running back Beanie Wells, a guy who's also demonstrated that he's not the most durable running back, getting nicked up quite frequently during his NFL career. But he has shown that he is willing to play through injuries, and turf toe is an injury that guys can play through. So it will limit the upside of Ryan Williams, but Ryan Williams is definitely worth an add. And considering a lot of people aren't necessarily attacking the waiver wire that much right now to pick him up, you could probably get him on the cheap. So definitely a guy worth stashing on your lineups. And our last look at the injury report from week 4 is Matthew Stafford from the Detroit Lions. Now, it is just a hamstring injury, and it is possible that he'll play through it. But keep your eye on this, because if Matthew Stafford can't go, Shaun Hill becomes a great pickup in that Detroit Lions offense. He performed incredibly well when Stafford was down with injuries before. And now that bye weeks are upon us, with Big Ben Roethlisberger and Andrew Luck heading on byes, Shaun Hill would be an excellent replacement for how you're using those two quarterbacks in your league. In the droppable department, we've got Kevin Smith showing up. It looks like Mikel Lashore is back and ready to take complete control of the running back situation in Detroit. He's not the most durable guy either, but he's definitely the one that's going to be leading that team until he gets injured, and really demonstrating that no one really gets eased back into lineups in the NFL anymore. If you're healthy enough to play, you're healthy enough to take on as much of a role in the offense as the coaches deem you ready to take on. Also in the completely droppable department is David Wilson from the New York Giants, especially now that Ahmad Bradshaw looks like he could be back in week 4, and Darrell Richardson on St. Louis, as it looks like Steven Jackson does what Steven Jackson does best. He plays through injuries. And really, you could probably drop just about any Pittsburgh running back. That running game doesn't look like it's getting off the ground at any time soon. And with all the options there, it's really hard to forecast exactly which running backs are going to be productive on any given day. In fact, Mendenhall might be a great add at this point, simply if you can store him somewhere on your bench, because it looks like that with none of these other running backs really stepping up there, you have a chance that when Mendenhall comes back, he could step back into a featured role there. So if you have the chance to add Mendenhall and keep him on your bench until he's really healthy, it might be worth that add. So next up on our video, we're going to take a look at the waiver ads that we're looking at making after week 3. So first off, we're looking at the tight end position. A position that, again, is demonstrating just that it's a very deep position this year. And unless you're in a league that's drafting or utilizing a lot of tight ends, you've got a lot of options out there for you. And there's no real reason for you to be hanging on to any particular name value like, say, Antonio Gates, as you've got other great performers out there. Now, that being said, don't go chasing after tight ends, especially after they have really big weeks. Get a tight end, put them in your lineup, as long as they're a solid contributor in their team's offense. That is, they're routinely getting a lot of targets and they're a focal point in the offense. Over the course of the season, they're going to return just the same amount of value as probably any other highly ranked tight end out there. So it's not a position that you want to be managing week to week or going after the hot free agent that's out there. Find a good tight end that has a strong position in their team's offense and just stick with them for the season. In the quarterback position, much like we talked about earlier, the only real quarterback that we're looking at adding there is Sean Hill, and that's only if Matthew Stafford does go down with injury. Next up is our look at the running back position, and you've got a couple of backup running backs that look like they're slowly getting more of the offense away from the incumbent starter. Specifically, we're talking about Bilal Powell from the New York Jets and Jacquizz Rodgers from Atlanta. Now the problem is that Sean Green and Michael Turner just aren't going to simply go away and disappear. And so if you're taking on either of these guys, you're taking them on as best as maybe your flex option, your number 3 running back, or even your number 4 running back on your team. Unless the starter goes down, they won't retain any great future fantasy value, but they're definitely worth a speculative add that as they take on a lot more of their team's offense in the future. And as we mentioned earlier, we're also looking at adding Ryan Williams from the Arizona Cardinals. And finally, the wide receiver position, or what we like to call here the knee-jerk reaction position, as following the trend of, say, Stephen Hill or Kevin Ogletree, that one game standout fantasy performances seem to get the fantasy community all excited about the potential of these wide receivers, when really they're not focal point in their offenses and really aren't worth the ad unless you're playing in a much, much deeper league. And so this week's knee-jerk reaction seemed to be Andrew Hawkins from Cincinnati and Jeremy Curley from the New York Jets. And really, these guys don't forecast to have a great long-term value. So if you're looking at adding these guys from your waiver wire, you're only adding them as maybe a top 40, top 50 wide receiving option in your league. So unless you're playing in a deeper league, you don't need these guys. So don't go out of your way to pick these guys up who don't forecast to have that strong of a fantasy future. And so the players that we're looking to add this week come from a couple of teams that are demonstrating that they're going to be playing from behind quite a bit this year. So the chances are they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. And these are the guys who are the number 1 receiving options on their teams, at least right now. And so they're definitely worth an add, even though they might not be the greatest wide receivers in the league. They're definitely going to be contributing a lot to their offense, so they're definitely worth an add in your league. Specifically, we're talking about from Oakland, Denarius Moore, who looks like he'll be taking over the number 1 receiving option on that Oakland team now that Darius Hayward-Bay is down with an injury. Denarius Moore already has shown that he has a pretty good rapport with Carson Palmer there, and with Oakland playing from behind a lot, there's a lot of potential there for Denarius Moore to be a great fantasy contributor while Hayward-Bay is out. And finally, from the Tennessee Titans, try to find a way to add Brandon LaFell or Kenny Britt to your teams. These guys are going to get a lot of targets in their offense as they're throwing the ball a lot, and clearly Tennessee can't rely on the running game right now. Coming out of week 3, those guys didn't perform that great, and it is possible that owners might be a little down on the prospects of these guys moving forward, when really the outlook for these guys is pretty strong. So if you can find a way to not give up too much to get these guys on your team, either through the waiver wire with Brandon LaFell or Kenny Britt trading for him, you might be able to get a guy on the cheap that could really be a great contributor for the rest of the season. And that concludes our look at the Week 3 recap of the fantasy football season. We hope you enjoyed this video and found some information useful that you can use to improve your fantasy football team. Stay tuned to this channel for more video updates in the future. Thanks for playing, and good luck in Week 4.